and welcome to the Strand. I'm Christina Foxley, the Director of Events, and I'm so pleased to welcome Peter Maass and Ed Kashi here tonight to discuss what we do for oil and what oil does for us. Peter Maass is a contributing writer to the New York Times Magazine and has reported from the Middle East, Asia, South America, and Africa. He has written for The New Yorker, The Atlantic Monthly, The Washington Post, and Slate, among many others. In its review of Maass's new book, Crude World, The Violent Twilight of Oil, The Washington Post noted, Peter Maass takes readers on a vivid tour of troubled oil frontiers, voyaging to places like Nigeria's polluted delta, Equatorial Guinea's dusty capital, Ecuador's scarred rainforest, and Russia's corporate boardrooms, where corruption is rife and environmental neglect all too common. It is a disturbing catalog of the underside of the international oil industry. Ed Kashi, author of Curse of the Black Gold, 50 Years of Oil in the Niger Delta, is a photojournalist, filmmaker, and educator dedicated to documenting the social and political issues that define our times. Kashi's work has been published in National Geographic, the New York Times Magazine, Time, Fortune, Geo, Newsweek, Natural History, U.S. News and World Report, The Atlantic Monthly, Granta, Aperture, and American Photo, among others. David Griffin, director of photography at National Geographic, has said that Ed Kashi always understands the nuances of his subjects. He fearlessly goes where few would venture, and he sympathetically captures the soul of each situation. Ed is one of the best of a new breed of photojournalistic artists. Following their presentation, Peter and Ed would be happy to take your questions. We'll pass around a microphone, so please wait for that before you speak. They will then sign copies of their books for you, which you can purchase downstairs on your way out of the store. Please join me in welcoming Peter Maass and Ed Kashi to the Strand.
Christina, thank you very much. I'm Ed. And Peter, thank you for making this happen. Oil's troubled path. It is troubled. It seems wherever I've been in the world, not just Iraq, but particularly in the Niger Delta, wherever I've been where there's oil, it seems to sort of leave some sort of path of destruction and corruption, just problems, as well as the problems at the end use with what it does to our environment and all that. I came into this subject in 2004. I was fortunate enough to meet Michael Watts, a professor at Berkeley, who had been going to Nigeria for 30 years, and he fortunately asked me to come and work with him there, and that was the beginning of a 3-year odyssey for me of going back and forth to the Niger Delta. I became impassioned about this particular subject. I've worked in over 60 countries around the world as a photojournalist, and I really have never seen such a stark sort of economic inequity that I saw in the Niger Delta. And, yes, there's lots of poverty in Africa and many continents, but the fact that $700 billion of wealth has been pumped out of the Niger Delta in the last 50 years. I mean, this place should not be the way it is. That it really starkly illustrated the corruption and the lack of development, how actually oil has had a negative impact on the people of the Niger Delta. And ultimately, it's people that I'm interested in all my work. It tends to be sort of the driving force of why I want to tell these kinds of stories and why I've dedicated myself to doing this kind of work. The Niger Delta is, and I think Peter would probably echo this, one of the toughest places I've ever worked as a journalist. At one point in 2006, I was detained for 4 days by the Nigerian military, which was pretty much the worst experience of my life. I mean, they didn't mistreat me, but it was quite harrowing. Fortunately, I was able to get a cell phone call out. Amazingly, we were out in the Delta, and there was cell reception. I was able to make a call before they confiscated everything. And I think if that had not happened, it might have been a darker and much longer odyssey for me. But I was able to, because I'm lucky to have a wife who's a journalist, the National Geographic, the U.S. State Department, Nigerian lawyers and human rights activists who were behind me, so they were able to jump in and help me and my colleague Elias Korzon, who's a Nigerian intellectual who was fortunate, who was nice enough to work with me. They held us both for these 4 days. So tonight what I want to show is a short multimedia piece that kind of encapsulates a lot of the message and a lot of the photographs that I had made. And it's been about 10 years that I've been working in this multimedia sphere and not just doing still photography. And one of the exciting things for me about working in this kind of new form, at least in my world, of storytelling, is that I can bring the voice of the subject out. And that is very, very exciting, and you'll see that here, as well as working with music and ambient sound. One of the things I wanted to mention is that for me, this kind of work is about advocacy journalism. That for me, when this kind of work appears in the National Geographic, that is not the end, it is the beginning. And it's events like these, it's having my work used by educators and academia, by NGOs, foundations, even corporations sometimes, individual activists. Oxfam America has fabricated an exhibit of this work that they're bringing to universities around the country. These are the kinds of sort of extra steps, if you like, or that I feel are vital for me as a journalist doing work today, because it is not enough to just raise awareness or to show how bad a place is or how bad a situation is. I really feel that it's incumbent upon me to get my work into the hands of experts and people who are just as impassioned or even more experts than I am in a given issue, so that they can use my work to advocate for change. So for instance, there's a bill, I think in Congress, going to the Congress now, about transparency in extractive industries. So that's oil, mining, and gas, where if it is passed, and Oxfam is trying to raise awareness on campuses around the country about this, it would force companies who engage in those activities to have more transparency as to where are the profits going and how are they spending their money, basically. So anyway, if we put the lights down, and we'll run this piece.
I come from a community of farmers and fishermen. People were fishing to survive. As a child growing up, there was no fish being brought from outside the community. Today, there is not a single person in our community who you can describe as a professional fisherman, because there is no fish to depend on.
This share of paradise, the delta of my birth, reels from an immeasurable wound. Barrels of alchemical droughts flow from this earth to the unquestioning world that lights up its life in a blind trust. The inheritance I sat on for centuries now crushes my body and soul.
We have enough wealth. How many thousand barrels of oil like this siphoning from our land every day? And how much is coming to us? Nothing. The oil companies themselves are not willing to come and sit down. At this moment, they make fantastic profit that nobody knows about. They produce the oil, they report to government, they sell the oil, and government sits down in Abuja only to receive the profits.
A lot of the money that is being generated from the oil revenue